want to start by actually showing everyone my favorite of your photographs.
Oh, I don't even know what your favorite is, Susan. I'm excited.
Well, once you see it, you're not going to be surprised. You've taken pictures of all kinds of communities and landscapes and portraits, but this is my favorite.
Oh, your dog.
So, for those of you who know Kathy's work, she does a lot of portrait photography, and our puppy Phoebe was in her studio one day, and Kathy hopped her up on the stool and managed to tap into Phoebe's calm and contemplative side, which
is only lasts usually 2 seconds in Phoebe's world. That is fantastic. That's hilarious, Susan.
Yeah, so I wanted to start with that. But what we're really here to do today is to talk about your current work.
Yes.
Which is presently on view at Reagan Projects in LA. The show opened in the weeks prior to the pandemic shutdown.
Yeah,
I think we're maybe open for 2 or 3 weeks.
No, 1 week.
Oh, 1 week.
Yeah, 1 week. And, you know, it's okay. This has happened to every single artist, every institution in the world. And, you know, even though we work for a number of years making a body of work and getting it up to the point of exhibition, I actually feel fortunate that I was able to see it in its 1 week moment, versus having other artists who've worked on exhibitions for years and that those exhibitions are literally canceled. So the 1 week was good. I got to see what it physically looked like. That came out of my head. And I think that's something that an artist is always anticipating, is what happens when the work gets into the actual space.
Yeah. Now, we brought a group, the Directors Advisory Council and friends, to LA in February during Freeze Week. Yes. And we got to visit you in the studio as you had just finished most of this work, and we're getting ready for it to go over to the gallery to be shown. So I feel like our group was in on this from the beginning. So it's a good opportunity then for those who were with us to see it installed in the gallery. The name of the show is Rhetorical Landscapes. Do you mind just saying something about the title, Kathy?
Well, yeah, I think that if you really think about my bodies of work, you'll understand that there's always a relationship to language or building upon language in what the kind of visual culture and visual world begins to do in terms of informing us, both through a practice of image making that's about bearing witness, but also a practice of image making that is, building worlds, so to speak, for us to look at. And so Rhetorical Landscape is really about language in relationship to this current administration. This show wouldn't have been built if it wasn't for the current political climate of America right now. It's in direct response for that. Some people might know a body of work I did where I went to Washington, D.C. to photograph Obama's inauguration. And there's always been a very big side of me as a person who has delved deep into the history of American politics and representation. So Rhetorical Landscape is the landscapes of swamps, right? That we should drain the swamps, this rhetoric we hear day after day. But in my mind, being a wife of somebody from Louisiana, swamps are actually very beautiful, delicate ecosystems. So I wanted to mirror the landscape of swamps with doing stop motion collages is what the viewer is seeing on the monitors, and begin to kind of use the idea of how we build language through a visual culture within this.
So will you just break down for us, just quickly, what the show is comprised of? This series of photographs.
Yeah, there are photographs that I made predominantly in Florida and Georgia, of swamps. I was teaching at the ACA, which is the Atlantic Center of Arts, and not last February, but the prior February 2019. And I went there to teach. And you know, when you go someplace, you're thinking like, well, okay, I'm going to be there. What am I going to do? And then after making The Modernist, which was the exhibition prior to this exhibition, I knew that I wanted to go back into the landscape, but I wanted to go back into the landscape in what swamps are, and looking at them. And so the exhibition is designed in such a way that you are with a very traditional size landscape photograph, which is like about 30 by 40 inches. And framed in, you know, this kind of beautiful walnut frame. So using like the kind of tradition of contemporary photography in an exhibition of these landscapes that in the years that I've been talking about landscape in different ways, I talk about it as a pause, as a moment where we kind of gather ourselves, and you sink deep into these landscapes in different ways, these swamp views where you see owls and alligators, that there's a certain quietness about them. And I'm always curious about what the landscape or the idea of going out into nature provides us as human beings in relationship to the cacophony of information that we're taking in on our daily lives. And so this exhibition tries to actually grapple with those questions.
So I want people to be able to see. So these are some of the photographs of the swamps, but I have an animation as well of a monitor to show. And so these monitors too were in the gallery.
Yeah, they're in a circle. They're in a circle facing outward. And I picked the monitors because they look like oversized iPhones. So when you're physically near the monitor, it's taller than you, unless you're a very tall person. But it's taller than me, which is really important. And you know, through the years of teaching at UCLA, I've been talking to my students a lot about like Instagram and photography on this device, and that all of us carry a camera in our pocket right now. And what does it mean, the fact that we carry a camera in our pocket? And then I wanted in the body of work, The Modernist, the protagonist, the character, Stash Fila, who's the artist, makes a really large collage of as their artwork as they're burning down the most iconic modernist houses of LA. And so following that tradition of collage, I was thinking a lot about the history of political collages. And I decided that I wanted it to live on a monitor and to bring back an old source of mine, and probably yours to a certain extent, Susan, is Monty Python, Flying Circus. In the 70s, I grew up with watching Monty Python before Saturday Night Live, and those Terry Gilliam collages really also invoked a sense of satirical satire within our political world. And so mirroring something about what we're doing now. So what you've just seen, let me describe a little bit about what you're seeing. Each image is cut out from a major magazine. From like NRA gun enthusiast magazines to, you know, regular popular magazines, and then home magazines, every kind of image you could imagine culminating into these. So I cut them out, and then I actually hand painted large pieces of archival paper with a grid. And so when you see all of the monitors, each grid is differently painted, and I wanted the hand to come into it. So what's the idea of the hand and the artist in relationship to this digital world that we are in? And so the collage that you just saw has its themes around global warming. So each collage in itself has a very specific theme that has been constantly referred to or in the news in relationship to the current administration. So you're seeing something get built and animated. And then at the end, that monitor holds onto that collage for 30 seconds before it loops again on itself. And so each one is dealing with a very specific issue, and they're tongue in cheek. There's humor in them.
They're really interesting to see, of course, in relationship to the lush color photographs of the swamps as well. So in one of the reviews that I read, there was, it said, it wondered whether you were thinking about print media, which of course all of the monitor images are cut from, and swamps. Are you thinking about them as both as disappearing ecosystems?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a huge part of it. That the swamps will disappear. We will no longer get magazines in the mail at some point that we can cut images out of. And so both of these, it's trying to, and with using the kind of contemporary mall monitor, because these monitors are basically used for malls and information kiosks. And so using that as a way of display brings in that question of how quickly things do change culturally in terms of ideas around images and representation.
You know, I know you to be a news junkie.
Yeah.
And I also know you to be kind of a nature junkie.
Yeah, that's true as well.
As well as a gadget junkie.
Yeah, I have all junkie aspects to me.
And this seems to be a point of intersection for those three interests. What do you think the overlapping issues between forget the gadgetry, but the news and the landscape, and ways we can continue to talk about tying them together?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, Susan. I think it's something that I've been grappling with over the years in different bodies of work. I think when I was doing horizon lines, it was about waiting and kind of what that provided to us in terms of a form and light.
Will you tell people
waiting.
what you did to take those horizon line photographs? Because it's actually an incredible project.
Well, they're shot with an 810 camera, so it's a large format camera. And, you know, it's basically like when I did the ice houses, I'm out during blizzards with an 8x10 camera on the ice, you know, watching the blizzard get worse, wondering not if I was going to get out of there. I did get stuck. That's a good story. It was a Fargo moment for me in Minnesota. But I think that there was a moment where things changed with photography as well. And I think that's the gadgetry, right? Is photography, I've always had what I say to my students, like, have a big toolbox. Know what equipment does, because each thing that you use has a different way that it interprets how you read an image. And so the horizon lines, yeah, you're lining up the middle of the 8x10, you know, glass grid, which is, anybody who's looked through a view camera, you might not know, but when you look through it, everything is upside down and flipped. And so you're in the blizzard doing that for hours, trying to make these very pristine photographs of ice houses. And it's the same thing within the swamps. You're waiting and you're looking. And I mean, a lot of times people think that I'm all alone, but in these particular photographs, especially in the Okefenokee swamps, I was jumping on a tour boat and making sure that I was in the front of the boat so that I wouldn't see the wake of water or people's heads. And so even though they feel like very isolated moments, And that's the great thing about photography. It can trick you by placing you in a place that you feel very alone, especially within a landscape. And I like that. I think that that's an interesting way to think about how we have to slow down our lives. Like, can the landscape be another place of meditation? I think for me, who doesn't have a practice in meditation, often the act of going out and photographing becomes that kind of place for me.
I think that makes sense looking at your photographs. You know, it seems to me that you have used photography to get to know a thing.
Yeah.
And, you know, you've used that in all different ways in different communities. I think of like the football players and the portraits of the surfers, and the ice houses are a great example. And now the swamps. So would you mind sharing what you learned from taking these photographs? Like, what do you know now from having these encounters?
Well, knowing what not to do.
Bet.
Around swamps for like a Ohio/California person is an important thing. Like in my mind, Susan, when I went to Florida to make these, I literally imagined myself with waders on, with like trudging in at like dusk or evening light and getting these kind of, you know, I think that it's come. Yeah. Anyway, I'm laughing at myself.
Yeah.
But yeah, after visiting the swamps, I realized that there would be no going into the swamp with waders, that they're alligators.
Because there were alligators already waiting. Yeah.
And so to go back to your question, I think that there's always something to learn in what it means to make photographs, like what it means in enacting. And I said something years ago that is still true, even with a landscape photograph, is that whenever you're putting yourself out there in the world, there is a moment of bearing witness that is utterly important. And that happens also within a landscape. That owl was there for me to look at in that moment. And I think that even though a landscape might offer us solace, it also is a marker of our time and how quickly this precious planet that we're living on is actually changing in its own vulnerability. And the same thing with vulnerability around humanity. And I think those are the things that I constantly learn, that I can embed these different things that are so important to me to talk about within various bodies of work.
That's really, it's so interesting. I just want to make sure, I want to go through some of these other
the other thing that I say about these, Susan, it's like that I laugh at, and people in the studio kind of don't really understand what I'm saying. But I also think of these as almost amateur National Geographic photographs, right? They're not quite good enough to be a National Geographic, but they're doing something else. Like if you spend time with this image, the last one you had, you'll notice that I'm using what is called in photography as depth of field in a very interesting way. So if I was actually photographing with an 8x10 camera, like I did handle most landscapes with, you would have everything in focus in the foreground and middle ground and background. And I'm really allowing only the middle ground for the most part to be in focus in these images. And that changes the way that you think about using a camera from like what a professional photographer would look at. So I'm kind of playing around with the language between amateur and professional in people's minds about how a photograph is constructed as well.
That's so interesting. That distinction you're making between what a nature photographer would do in a magazine, where the primary agenda would be to be representing nature in the most naturalistic way, which is different from what you're doing here. It's trying to tell a different story through nature. And so one does have these other views. I very much look forward to seeing them again in person to see all of those characteristics. Can we look at some more?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because they're all really different as well. Like you've captured all of these variable views of swamps. And, you know, for basically a city girl like myself, you know, a swamp is a very monolithic kind of image, not these different arrays of colors and different trees. I mean, this is a staggeringly beautiful photograph.
Yeah, and it has the layers in it that we don't really think about when we think about a swamp. And I think that's something really important to talk about with you is like what I think about in relationship to iconic in photography, and how that I always try to flip the iconic on itself in some way for us to get a new view or enter something with a new perspective. And that's really important for me over the years as I recognizing how I deal with different subjects of what its relationship to how we think a subject is portrayed. And so this is just, you know, a very red kind of landscape that goes deeper into itself and it begins to disappear. And, you know, I try to load things up more metaphorically in relationship to how we digest and look at images than I necessarily do with trying to find what is already known as the kind of iconic play of things. Like when I was on the ship, for example, when I did 12 Miles to the Horizon, where I went from Korea to the port of Long Beach, from Busan to the port of Long Beach on a container ship, which was Hanjin shipping. The body of work that I did was every sunrise and every sunset, because it's the most cliche thing that you can do in photography. But in the end of the day, some days it was too foggy for the sun to rise. And so how that breaks with how we think of time and also the cliche, besides being iconic, how do we kind of collapse the cliche to a certain extent? And those are all things that I'm constantly playing with and making bodies of work.
It's so interesting because, you know, I see this photograph and I think of the earliest representations of landscape, which I think of like late 15th century Netherlandish landscapes. And they're classically constructed just like this. You know, the foreground is the darkest color. The image is the starkest there. And then as it goes from foreground to middle to further middle to background, it gets lighter and lighter and lighter and less distinct. And you're clearly playing on that classical tradition here.
Yeah, it's very, I'm not that far away from, you know, being a closeted old painter. So that's there.
Now let's
look at work, actually.
So you must be on a tour boat in this one.
No, I'm actually on a bridge.
Oh.
And so I'm on a bridge and it's pouring rain and they've stopped the tour boats where I was because of the pouring rain. So I'm just walking the ramps around the swamp. And this is a private adventure swamp connected to Okefenokee, but it's not the national park of Okefenokee. It's like a subset private kind of place. And I've always been interested in that too, like what is a preserve versus people who take people out on swamp shores and feed the alligators chicken and things like that, which isn't that great for the ecosystem. So how do we ecologically look at tourism within nature? But it's pouring rain and it was just beautiful because the light and everything, it's pretty hard not to take an image like this. And, you know, and cameras freeze things. Like there's a thing called a shutter speed, and to freeze drops of water coming in is just, I don't know, it's utterly poetic for me. And I personally don't mind going down that road as well.
Well, uh, it's absolutely right. I mean, the texture of the water, the ripples created by the different drops, and then the way that the water is moving in some places and the reflection of the sun on it. I mean, it really is lyrical, what you've captured here.
Yeah,
And
it's really beautiful. And it's funny because at the opening, people were looking at it and like asking me like, oh my God, how did you make that photograph? And you know me. I mean, you actually know me pretty well. We've spent time in dinner parties together and so forth. And I was just like, it was raining. So
that's what happens. But this truly does give the sense that you are alone in nature, in this, not great weather. So it's actually, it would be disappointing for you to tell us that there was actually a crowd of people behind you as well.
yeah, this one there wasn't. So I was alone in nature. But I try to have everything feel like that. But I did find I had to cancel it, unfortunately. But I was supposed to go for my spring break in March. And I found an amazing boat driver in Louisiana who was going to take me out into the deep, deep areas of the swamp by myself for 2 days.
Oh, wow.
And so I realized after kind of the Florida moment that I do kind of want to be alone with a person that I can actually say, no, stop here for a while. Let me just watch the light change for about 30, 40 minutes here and just be in this spot, which you can't do on these public boats. So I'm realizing now the body of work, isn't finished. I haven't explored it to its capacity in my mind. And I'm really looking forward to meeting up with Andrew to explore the Louisiana swamps with him.
Oh, wow. That will be amazing. We all look forward to seeing
Yeah.
what comes of those photographs. Here's another one, but I want to go to the final image. So the day that we visited you with the Directors Advisory Board in your studio, we were also joined by the Cantor's new assistant curator of photography, Maggie Detloff. And prior to us even making the plan to go and visit you in your studio, when she arrived, she looked at the collection and we talked about photographs, work that she might want to add to it. And she said, it would be really great if we could acquire a work by Catherine Opie. So she came with us on this studio visit. And this is the photograph that she has picked out and that we are considering for acquisition at the Cantor. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, I think that this is like another interesting, complicated photograph of a swamp in which that most people who look at it say, like, why is there snow on the ground? Well, there is no snow on the ground. It is bog water that bubbles up and gives off this kind of white foam on the surface. And I'm particularly interested in black bottom swamps because of the prior image you showed where how they mirror, they reflect. So a black bottom swamp has an enormous amount of mirroring reflective quality to it because of the plants that, what it's doing to its ecosystem of making the water. You look at the water and you think it's just like pure mud. It's not. You pick it up and it looks like a tea bag had gone in the water because of all the plant life. And so go back to the one that you guys are thinking of acquiring. What I love about that is just the layers of light in it. That if you look deep into the photograph in the background, all of a sudden the light is streaming through the trees in a way that has this little highlight, and it brings this kind of red-leafed bush out in a certain way, and it just becomes a really complicated photograph of how we view landscape, that immediately you think it's snow and then you have to reevaluate things. And that's what I want people to do with photographs, is I actually want them to spend more time thinking about how a photograph is what it's doing in it than necessarily a quick read. So the idea that then all over time you realize like, oh, it's foam. What is that foam? Or you look at how it's leveled. It's, sorry, I looked over. My partner just came in to the office. But yeah, that's one of the reasons why I really, really love that image. It's actually one of my favorite images in the series.
Maggie is an astute curator. Yeah, it's one of my favorites as well. And I love the hanging quality of the branches in the foreground. They kind of remind me of a theater curtain opening up onto a scene behind it. And then, of course, one is somewhat disturbed by the foam and why there is foam like that in such an isolated place in nature. Is it the degradation of the environment? Is it natural? Do you know?
It's natural. It's a natural occurrence in which that the plant life is releasing oxygen, and it creates this kind of, I don't know exactly what the foam is called. If I was with the naturalist, he could tell me. So if anybody's naturalist and wants to chat the actual name of it, but it happens in where it's a bog at this point, where it's just releasing kind of nitrogen into the water, and it creates this kind of foamy substance. Sorry for my inarticulate natural language.
So interesting. All right, I want to go, this is more of the swamps, and then there are the 8 monitors.
Yes. And there's going to be 9 now.
Oh.
Because even though I thought I was done, apparently I'm not done. Well, there has to be a COVID-19 collage.
Oh, of course.
How can you not have a COVID-19 collage during the Trump administration?
So what magazines are you collecting images from?
Everything, every source, you know. So from Time Magazine to The Week to The New Yorker to survivalist magazines to gay rights magazines to pot farmer magazines to agricultural magazines, Home Beauty, Country Home. That little sheriff dog down there on that corner of the collage next to Mitch McConnell wearing a Bernie Sanders t-shirt. Little sheriff dog just was cut out from a country magazine that you could buy. You could buy this little ceramic dog with a sheriff's outfit. And I just kept laughing at him about him. There he comes. He comes in right now. And it's just like he was Sheriff Puppy to me. And it's just like, it's absurd. Then you have McConnell come in. So all of them in a certain way with the animator. I worked with an amazing animator who just had graduated from Cal Arts by the name of Sam Gurry. Who I would dictate how I wanted it, because the collage was all made. So then we had to break it apart and rebuild it again in animation. Oh, here comes Zuckerberg. So this is how I would kind of narrate it to him. And Zuckerberg's going to get a big wheelbarrow full of cash because, he's just got Facebook. He just needs his big wheelbarrow of cash. So he's going to dip down in that wheelbarrow. And Pence is an angel, but he's got his gun. But wait, Zuckerberg doesn't need cash because Zuckerberg has to hold a big baby. And so all of a sudden, Zuckerberg's a baby man, So there's that kind of humor that actually you don't see in my work. That's the interesting thing is personally, I think that I have a good sense of humor. Either my students are laughing at me because I'm an idiot, or they actually value that I have a sense of humor. But this body of work really brings the humor in for me in a different way than other bodies of work.
And they're
the judges. They're like on TikTok with their heads, the wonderful, and then here comes Money Man. And it's like, this is like probably cut out of some Financial Times. But then on the $100 bill, you're going to end up with Elizabeth Warren's face. And Trump with his guns and his boots, he ends up being a drag queen. Pence ends up having his rifle taken away. There's the gay flag coming in. So he's just, instead of being a king, he's going to become a queen. And there's the drag eye. The boots get kicked off and a pair of heels come on. And Pence's gun gets replaced with weed. And Elizabeth Warren gets to be on the $100 bill.
If only. And tell us about putting it all on a grid like that. You know, the grid in modernism has come to be read as the equalizing feature. Everything is the same. Why do you choose a grid here? You're trying to topple hierarchy?
Yeah, I wanted to disrupt the grid, and that's why the hand painted it, is I wanted to topple hierarchy in that way. That the tiny little boxes, what they represent in terms of being able to make perfect equations. Well, what is the perfection around equations if we don't actually have humanity within that equation?
Yeah. They're so interesting. So interesting. I look forward to seeing the COVID-19 monitor. Do you get all of those magazines delivered to your house?
Actually, Julie felt there were too many magazines, so we got delivered to the studio.
So
but I also cut out for over a 2-year period of time every photograph in the LA Times. But none of those ended up in this. So the interesting thing that you don't really ever see in making a body of work is the research an artist does it to get to that place. And so there's like, stacks and stacks of folder of every day with that day written down of it, of LA Times photographs. But I ended up not wanting to use pure kind of journalism as the image. I wanted to borrow more, and I liked the glossy material better from magazines, the way that they read in the collage versus the newsprint.
Yeah. And the juxtaposition of, good old fashioned print media and the full scale iPhone is really a great one. Each pushing up against the other, the new technology, the old technology. It really makes for a visually compelling object.
You should see me. I was so excited when I ordered the monitor on Amazon. Thank you, Jeff Bezos. Anyway, I first looked on Alibaba and I was trying to figure out how to make a custom monitor. And then when these came up and this specific maker of the monitor, and how it looked like the early iPhone with the curves, and it has these stainless steel finish around the edge, just like the first iteration of the iPhone had. And we got into the studio and we put the first done collage on it. I was just like, oh my gosh, I'm so excited. This is it. We found our form.
Yeah, it's really amazing. Hey, Kathy, we are coming to the end of our time. Would you mind taking a question or two?
I would love to take a question or two.
I'm going to stop sharing my screen and see. And if anyone wants to submit a question on the chat, you are welcome to. So if anyone wants to submit a question.
Well, Norman Roth did ask any, which I kind of answered a little bit in your question, any political significance to the idea that swamps are a consequence of the decay of nature. And I think that, yeah, there is a significance to that because, I try not to ever drink out of a plastic water bottle, and I use, we don't buy Ziploc bags. We compost, we garden, we try to be as kind as we can. I drive an electric car. So there is a consequence to the decay of environment that I definitely find in swamps, but also their fragility. It's an incredibly fragile ecosystem that will disappear.
And of what I know of you, you do live your politics. Here, I have a question for you. Someone asks, can you talk about the relationship between skin and swamps? And of course, that's someone who knows your previous
my work. That's an interesting question, because I think that there's different aspects to everything, but I really do look at it as one big, large kind of organism, that both skin and swamps are an organism. We absorb everything from our environments on the skin in the same way that trees talk to each other. If you guys want a really great book to read The Overstory. That'll have you, make you think about trees in a way that you've never thought about trees before, or maybe you have. But I do think about how it is all connected. And that's part of getting to humanity, as well as the relationship to connectivity we have to this precious earth that we live on.
Yeah, yeah. All right, Kathy, this has been so interesting. I'm so grateful that you are part of this conversation. And I very much look forward to seeing more of your work and continuing to talk to you about this series.
Thank you. And thank you so much for everything that you do and the remarkable exhibitions that you bring forth to the community. And thank you also for including my work in your collection. I really, really appreciate that.
Oh, we are working on it. We can't wait to be back in the building and have our systems in place again.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're really looking forward to it.
And for everybody who signed on, thank you so much. Be safe, be healthy, embrace the ones you love. And yeah, I appreciate you spending some time with Susan and I.
Yep, I concur. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you all again soon.
Okay.
Bye, Kathy.
Bye.